I'm gonna kick us off here. Welcome everybody. Good to see you all today. So this is the last session we're doing, getting feedback on the administration's executive orders on apprenticeship expansion. We'll talk a little bit about our next steps, and we've got one final session coming up at the end. So today we're going to talk about the role of states and state agencies. So we have a direction on apprenticeship expansion at the federal level, but two-thirds of our apprenticeship system is state-based, and it's those agencies and those state legislators and administrators that are going to be doing a lot of the work necessary for expansion. So this is a really important topic for us. Last one we're tackling, but certainly not the least. Denise, can I ask you to just bring up the slides, please? Thanks. And just going on to the second slide, just a bit of housekeeping, how we're going to run the session up front. So as usual, we'll just do a bit of context setting up front. We'll set the scene a little bit, and then we're going to have a conversation with some of our state directors. So really pleased to have David Polk from Wisconsin here and Dane Salentich from Iowa. So then we'll open up the discussion from about kind of 30 minutes in. So please put your hands up, join the discussion, ask questions, put any comments in the sidebar. We'll be recording this and using that to write up our feedback to the administration and Congress. And we'll stick around for 10 minutes at the end without recording for any of the off the record conversation. So going on to the next slide. Starting with what the executive orders say on states. This is a quick and easy one because they don't actually mention states or state agencies at all. All the actions of the executive orders set in place are very much geared around federal activity, what federal agencies can be doing. But what we're hearing from the administration is that they see the direction as increasingly state-based. So there was a sign in the last round of the state expansion grant that went out earlier this year that they want more states to set up state SAAs, state agencies. That was listed as a kind of allowable cost under the grant. And we got another indication in the president's budget, which there's a proposal to move workforce funding to a block grant model dispersed by states. And more, a bit more indirectly, but it's also worth acknowledging what's happening with the federal workforce. So we've heard between 30 to 40% of the Office of Apprenticeship staff have left. So there's far less capacity at the federal level, a gap that needs to be filled at the state level. So before I bring in David and Dane, I just want to talk a little bit about why we as an AFA think that states are such an important part of scaling apprenticeships and why they've got the levers to do this. So just going on to the next slide. This is some analysis taken from a report we put out last year, which was a state policy scan on what states are doing to grow apprenticeships. I want to caveat this up front. So this data is taken from Rapid. So it's the only kind of comparable national data we've got, but we know that it's just not accurate for a handful of dates. So we don't use this in any way to, kind of make an assessment or use ranking. But there's a couple of points in the context of this conversation that are useful. What it shows is active apprenticeships as a proportion of the labour force by state and the change in time over the last 10 years there. So purple is the level in 2014, green is what it was in 2024. And overall, it's a positive story. Everyone's growing apprenticeships pretty significantly. In the context of the role of states on expansion, I think there's a couple of messages to draw out here. Firstly, we've got some pretty significant variation. Some states have made huge progress in over a decade, increased by well over 100%. If you look at Montana, Maryland, Delaware on that graph, some less progress, although everyone's grown. I think that shows, state policy and state action really matters. If the direction was set by kind of federal action, we'd see, a much more even distribution of growth. but we know that states are taking different decisions, different actions here, and that's really the kind of driver of growth. Um, and then the second point from this, just going back to our kind of overall context of 1 million, reaching 1 million apprenticeships, how ambitious that is. I think this graph shows that dramatic progress is really possible, with the right measures at the state level. If we saw similar to increases as we've seen in the last decade, we can get to 1 million. Alison, just to pick up the question in the sidebar. So this should, in theory, be both OA and SAA registered apprenticeships. That data is now in the rapid system for all states. There's a handful of states where there's some translation issues, and the state and federal numbers don't completely match up. And then going on to the next slide. So in the same report, we do an analysis of those levers that states are using to grow apprenticeships. So we went through all the state legislation on apprenticeship. There's been over 1,000 bits of legislation in the last decade. Looked at policy documents, state agency policies, and we did some case studies and interviews with state directors. I'm not going to go through the detail of all of this. You can read the report if you're interested, but just to frame the discussion we're having today, there's a huge amount of levers at the disposal of states, right? We're increasingly seeing states, using funding, using things like their procurement policies to promote apprenticeships. States have got control over, their own processes around registration and apprenticeability, and they've got, wider levers on other large areas of state activity in education. They have their own really significant workforces, which are ripe for apprenticeships. So just to recap, not much directly in the executive orders about states, but really lots of the policy we're going to be talking about, lots of the work on expansion, reaching this 1 million apprenticeship goal is going to be at the state level, not the federal level. But it's complex picture. There's lots to get into and debate. So I now want to bring in David and Dane, who are the experts here. So David, Dane, and Denise, if we could put the slides down and get the spotlight on our panelists. I just want to start with some introductions. Let's start with you, David. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and your role and your journey in apprenticeship?
Sure. My name is David Polk, everyone. I am the state director for the great state of Wisconsin. I also serve as current president of NASTAD. Not only do I have the honor of leading the state of Wisconsin and the wonderful organization NASTAD, I'm also a former apprentice myself. I'm a product of the system. I'd gone through a plumbing apprenticeship a mere 25 years ago. I'm sure that dates me. I started my apprenticeship back in the 1900s. Um, but all of that said, I have a very specific contextual lens that comes from my experience in the system. I also served as an associate dean at our state's largest technical college. Our technical college is very much entrenched in the process of registered apprenticeship in the state of Wisconsin. So I have that lens, and then moved up to delivering the program for the entirety of the state. So when it comes to registered apprenticeship, my experience is expansive from going from a participant all the way to leading the program for the state of Wisconsin and leading the association of my counterparts for the country. That said, I have a very benevolent approach to ensuring that the execution of registered apprenticeship not only is productive in advancing participants in the program on the employer side and sponsor side, but also ensuring that we have the best experience that we can deliver for those apprentices as they will be the future mentors and trainers of our system.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. And it's brilliant to have your frontline experience in a role like yours. Dane, how about you? Can you tell us a bit about yourself and what brought you into apprenticeship?
Yeah. Hello, everybody. I'm Dane Salentic. I am the Iowa State Apprenticeship Director. I will get into this, I think, a bit later here, but we have been a state apprenticeship agency, SAA state, for almost a year to the day. June 27th of last year, we got our approval. So I've been in this role as director for actually going on 2 years. And before that, I was the state apprenticeship coordinator for the Iowa Department of Corrections. And I think that's kind of where I really saw how apprenticeship can impact people on a very personal level. Working with incarcerated individuals in those populations, there's a ton of barriers. And one of the consistent things that we found was that apprenticeship knocked a lot of those barriers down. We were lucky enough to be able to have, I think, about 30 different registered programs with over 300 apprentices participating in those throughout the state. And it gave them real work experience. It gave them the motivation. And not only that, while they were incarcerated, but it got them job opportunities outside of once they were released. And so I think that's where, when I had the opportunity to, be the first in this role, I wanted to expand on that. I really could. I wanted to, if this is a viable path for individuals with that many barriers, how can we? This is a perfect opportunity for us to continue and grow in the state of Iowa, knowing that our unemployment rate is very low, but we still have employers that are needing skilled workers in the workforce. So this was I don't want to say easy transition, but a pretty easy decision for me to jump in here and get this office started, get it off the ground, and start to really identify strategies for us to build apprenticeship throughout continue to build apprenticeship throughout the state of Iowa. So really happy to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. And we'll get into that, what that transition looked like a bit later. And if I'm not mistaken, I think we've got the oldest and the newest state apprenticeship agencies here. So I want to start, we're talking about states as the drivers of growth. So let's get into some specifics, what that looks like on a practical level. So can you tell us about what's happened in your state, how you've grown apprenticeships? David, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you for that question. I think this particular webinar, having Wisconsin as the oldest SAA and Iowa as the newest SSA, it'll give some context to some of the contrast of our very tenured history and some of the things that Iowa, our neighbor to the southwest, is doing, and the things that we were able to do to execute in concert. So Wisconsin being the oldest SAA, we are pretty well funded. Our legislature and our state overall definitely regards registered apprenticeship as a tenet of workforce development. And this came as a strategy with some of the funding that we use to bring on not only more ATRs, apprenticeship training representatives in our state. We have a specific role called an AOR, and those are apprenticeship outreach representatives. The role is different because our ATRs work with in spaces that are more rudimentary to registered apprenticeship. So the construction trades, manufacturers, some service industries that are long tenured participants in registered apprenticeship, whereas our AOR's specific work, very specific work, is to work with those employers and sponsors that are very new to apprenticeship. So there's a specific difference in approach in those in that work. And our ATRs can turn around a registered apprenticeship with a new sponsor in those construction and manufacturing fields in a week. Whereas an AOR has to build a very specific relationship with a potential sponsor to get buy-in. I'll put air quotes around that buy-in for that stakeholder in their specific industry to start to use registered apprenticeship as an investment in the future of their workforce. So the work is specifically different, but we're bearing a lot of fruit from that outreach in our numbers specifically, but more so our numbers in what we call emerging sector registered apprenticeships. And those are just industries that are very, very new. Another thing that we've been able to do is the execution of our youth apprenticeship program. And Wisconsin's youth apprenticeship program is nationally known for its explosive numbers and its very specific context to high school youth in school, 16 to 18 years old, whereas other iterations around the country have a more expansive definition. But more recently, we've been able to garner data around our youth apprenticeship program. And in 2024, we were able to have 11, almost 12% of our new apprentice contracts for that year were youth apprenticeship participants. And that's really important for us because we were able to go out specifically to those youth apprenticeship employers and do the work in getting them to buy into our system if they're not registered apprenticeship employers. So what we've seen is more seamless bridging from youth apprenticeship to registered apprenticeship, which has also exploded our numbers to 3 straight years of record growth in our registered apprenticeship program. Last year, ending in well over 17,000 registered apprenticeships in our system for the year 2024. So specifically, myself and the states that I lead in NASDAQ were able to take a very specific approach to the industries that are executed in our respective states and do very, very specific outreach on the ground because as an SAA, we're much more familiar with how those industries work, who those specific individuals in leadership are, how to gather those specific industries in a large room or a small room and be more attuned to the very specific needs in our respective states as we execute. And that's the benefit of being an SAA, to be able to take that nuanced approach to grow apprenticeship respectively.
Thanks, David. There's some fantastic numbers in there that we're celebrating. And I just wanted to highlight something you said there about you have your ATRs and AORs. So you have a kind of, your regulatory function for industries and sectors where this is established, but then you're also playing a kind of marketing and outreach function for where it's less established. Dane, over to you. What does expansion and growth look like in Iowa?
Yeah, and I think to start with, I want to give a little bit of historical context. I mean, even going back to your slide here that showed with that graph, you'll see Iowa's right up there at the top. And it has been, as far as per capita, Iowa's not a very large state. I think our population hovers around 3 million. But apprenticeship has been a huge part of our labor force going back decades, but especially the last 10 to 15 years. And I do want to give kudos to our OA team here, before SAA, obviously, of helping expand that and getting, looking at apprenticeship a different way, growing it in those non-traditional apprenticeship programs, looking outside of trades, working with youth, looking at high schools and how that can be a guide into registered apprenticeship as well. So I want to say, just again, apprenticeship has been growing over the last decade or so. And I think really it was about 5 to 7 years ago where our Iowa administration and our leadership here within Iowa Workforce Development, which is the state agency that my office is housed under, saw that this was a path. This is a viable, real path for multiple people and multiple young people outside of the trades, obviously focusing on the trades too, but outside of the trades. So there was a goal that was set in Iowa to get, I believe, about 70% of everyone graduating high school into some post-secondary training. And that obviously included registered apprenticeship. So there's been a huge push, like I said, for the past 5 to 7 years, getting our state agencies working together, really coming together and figuring, okay, you all do this part really well, you do that, we do this well, you do that. And then about 3 or 4 years ago is when that discussion of moving towards or transitioning to that state apprenticeship agency really started to happen. And then that obviously, once we realized, or once the administration realized, like, all that we can do, again, to kind of echo what David said, was we have a much better feel at the state level of what the needs are of the employers and how we can interact and reach out to them, work with them specifically, than at a federal level. So I think once we, the plan was in place, that took off, and here we are today, a year into our SAA. And I think, again, we don't have the history as an SAA as what Wisconsin does, but I think putting our team together, the outreach is crucial. And the other thing I just jotted down is the education. I think that's the one big piece of helping people understand what a registered apprenticeship is and how it works. It's weird, you've asked me 8-10 years ago about registered apprenticeship, and I would have said, well, it's something an electrician does or a plumber does. And I wouldn't know the difference between that or an internship. Well, fast forward, and wow, there's obviously a huge difference with all of those. And I think it's really helping employers and the public understand what registered apprenticeship is and how it works. And I think that's what our team does as far as that outreach and that expansion. We also, again, as I mentioned, within our state agency that we're housed under, we have business engagement consultants that work directly with employers. So going back to what David was saying about the AOR, those are our BECs. Everyone's got acronyms, where they are working with those employers specifically to help them with their needs. And if registered apprenticeship comes up, hey, have you thought about registered apprenticeship? Do you want more information? Then that's when our office would come in to provide that. So we have a really good plan to, as a statewide net, to build that from the ground up and let every employer in the state, or try to let or have every employer in the state of Iowa understand that registered apprenticeship could be a pathway. It doesn't have to be, but here's the information on that. So I think it's just continuing to expand on what has been done over the last 10 or 15 years, but at a much more specific community level, employer level, and really, that one-on-one technical assistance. That's where our Iowa Office Apprenticeship team really comes into place. And we just did, within a year, we've seen some outstanding feedback of just, oh, wow, we didn't know that, or this is very helpful, or, maybe this isn't right for us, but we're going to look at this down the road. And employers appreciating us explaining to them what registered apprenticeship is and how it really can be utilized. Don't get me wrong, there are a lot of, restraints or restrictions, if you will. That's what makes registered apprenticeship what it is. But there's also a lot of movement and customizability, if you will, that employers can use. So I think that's what we've really focused on, especially in the last couple of years, as far as growing and expanding programs here in Iowa, is the education and the technical assistance, and everything else will fall into place. But people have to understand what it is and how it helps them.
Great points, thanks, Dan. And there were some common themes there: education and outreach with industries nearer to apprenticeship, a focus on youth, and you also mentioned you had a kind of a state goal around high school destinations that brought in apprenticeship. We've seen that with a handful of states where they've set their own state goals for apprenticeship. That's really, really powerful tool. So turning to the executive orders, we've just talked about, the last decade, a big wave of growth. We're now looking at another wave of growth. So nationally, going from currently around 620,000 apprenticeships to 1 million. So over a 30% increase. What are your reflections on this? Is this achievable? What does this look like for you as state leaders? And Dane, let's start with you. What does this look like in Iowa?
When I first saw the number, it was a bit eye-opening, but then when you start to, because $1 million's a big number, but when you start to look at it from a national perspective and understand kind of the context, again, context is very important, of how apprenticeship has been growing and how, more and more states are looking to transition to SAA. we did, you know, so as you start to really dive into it, I think it is absolutely achievable. I mean, we've been steadily growing apprenticeship by the thousands, you know, over the last 5 to 10 years. And I think, but that doesn't happen overnight, and that doesn't happen in a vacuum. You need support, you need resources. And then going back to the education, you need people to understand how all of this works, so that when you do implement these, or you are trying to roll out these large state initiatives or these bigger plans to increase the number of apprentices, it doesn't just work for a couple years, but it's sustainable. That again, we've got to look at the sustainability of all of this as well. 1 million is a great number to achieve, but let's achieve it and get those 1 million completed, and those 1 million continuing to work in that career that they got their apprenticeship through, right? And then we continue to build off of that. So I think, I mean, that is a very loaded question, and it, you know, per the executive order, there wasn't a lot of context around it, which is fine. You know, I think that allows for these discussions for us. How do we get there collectively? What is that approach? And I think, again, you know, we've had conversations with NASTAD and the other SAA states to, you know, what are you guys doing? How are we doing this? So I think it's absolutely achievable. And I just think there's going to need to have some continuity nationwide. And then also, again, I think there's going to need to be some resources to help, especially new states that are wanting to transition to SAA, and, you know, those other states where maybe the funding isn't quite there yet, or they need to jumpstart their apprenticeship approach. So, but short answer, yes, I think it is achievable.
Cool, brilliant. Love the optimism, or cautious optimism. David, what are your reflections?
Well, so first and foremost, I as a former apprentice and leading NASTAD, I would absolutely love to see 1 million apprentices, and I think our peak national growth, national record was in and around 680,000. I think at one point last year we hit 680,000, or we may be at that now. But the thing is, we have to keep going with the nuanced approach, and I would be remiss if I weren't to say that the most recent investments over the past, 5 to 6 years in registered apprenticeship has assisted in hitting those peak numbers nationally. I know for certain that it has assisted in Wisconsin breaking registered apprenticeship participation for 3 straight years now. And part of that strategy with our AORs started with being able to fund them and prove that it was a working format for then our state to take over funding them as staff. So the recent investments in registered apprenticeship is definitely one of the levers in improving the registered apprenticeship model, and then allowing us states to take over those specific investments. The other thing is we already have states that are making specific state investments. In our state, we have our Wisconsin Fast Forward, our workforce innovation grants that can now be used for registered apprenticeship. I think our friends in North Carolina have a tax incentive for registered apprenticeship sponsors to continue that investments. There's been investments in our SAA states around funding the classroom education requirement for apprentices. So we're making those state level investments, but to be able to do the specific nuanced investments that we would love to do as states, we have to continue some of the federal funding. And another point to make is, again, we have the oldest SAA and the newest SAA. Becoming an SAA is just not a turn of a switch and now it's yours. My state has been an SAA for 120 years. So the buy-in for the legislature to continuously invest in our apprenticeship model in Wisconsin is not a heavy sell. But when you talk about my counterpart here, who is an SAA of 2 years, they're in their infancy. They have to continue to prove out that model. So you're talking about a state that really needs that consistent investment to help with the cornerstone and the building blocks of them continuing on as an SAA. So the expectation for us to reach 1 million apprentices is a much different lens from our newer states than it is a more tenured state like myself. Although it has been a lever, if we're going to get there, states like Iowa, states like Tennessee, Alabama, our newer states are going to need some consistent funding to continue that growth to 1 million. And that's something that'll be imperative to reach that goal.
Great points and well said. I think consistent and predictable funding is the theme of all the conversations we've had around these executive orders. We're getting a lot of questions in the sidebar. I'm going to ask a few more questions myself, then I'll start bringing people in. So please start putting your hands up. So we talked about the need for funding. What else do you need from the federal government to enable this? Are there kind of policy issues that need clarification or guidance? What could the federal government do to support your expansion efforts? David, can I start with you?
Sure. So one of the things that we cannot overlook is that for all intents and purposes, the history of registered apprenticeship has followed the lines of the economy. When the economy is thriving, registered apprenticeship is thriving, and so on. So that said, we're gonna first need the economy to stay intact if we're gonna even attempt to reach 1 million apprentices. As soon as the economy slows, we're definitely going to see a dip in registered apprenticeship participation, and that's historic data that we can point to. So, firstly, we're going to need a thriving economy to if we think we're going to get anywhere close to 1 million apprentices. We're going to need continued state investment. So those innovative programs that I discussed previously, our states across the nation are going to have to continue to invest in registered apprenticeship and their state apprenticeship agency so that we can make those leaps to 1 million apprentices. And, again, we're going to have continued, consistent growth funding from the Fed down to our states, because the data shows that that has been a lever in producing the most registered apprenticeships that we've ever seen in the country. So that's it. I think we're gonna have to have those things in place if we're gonna get 1 million active apprentices in our system.
Yeah, completely agree. And an excellent point on the economy. I think we know that in an economic downturn, one of the first things to go in the private sector is spending on training, which is just another argument for that sustained and predictable public funding. Dane, anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I mean, those are probably the main pieces. And I just want to echo, again, the economy is huge. And when we have our meetings with employers, one of the first points we make is registered apprenticeship is a job. People get hired and then they go through the registered apprenticeship as a training pathway. So it isn't just a training program, here and there for a few months that's, funded in some magical way. It is a job for people, and it is directly tied to the economy, and job growth and all of those indicators. I've seen some of these questions pop up about completion rates and all of those things. And yeah, I mean, that is a key driver of individuals completing, and the robustness of registered apprenticeship is the economy. We already hit on the funding. I guess the one thing I would say, which is going to be specific to every state, I think, but the apprenticeship has been around for a long time, and some of these occupations have been registered for a very long time. The technology and the use of artificial intelligence and all of these parameters that weren't around 10 years ago, let alone 60 years ago, I think there could be some updating of what the standards and the work processes are for some of these occupations, to bring them more up to the 21st century, allowing, a little more wiggle room, if you will, within some of the guidelines within these work processes. Again, and I know some of these are a bit controversial. It just depends on, kind of what state you're in and, maybe of a certain age. But I think, again, it all goes back to the point of growing and expanding. And if we just focus on that 1 million number, yeah, we're steadily growing. But if we really want to get more and more people, especially in non-traditional occupations, into this pathway, we have to allow a little more ease of access, and then also access to all. So I think looking at some of the guidelines, looking at some of the occupational parameters, maybe allowing for more, flexibility within those. A registered apprenticeship is what it is, and the standards that are in place and the requirements that are there make it what it is. That doesn't have to mean it has to be that way forever, because it's always been that way. So I think what I'm really saying is we need to take a look at all things right now, because in a few months, it could look drastically different. So what if we're looking at it, let's look at all of it, and let's see what we can change potentially within those standards, within those federal guidelines, that of CFR 29 and 30, and see if there's ways for us to make it a little bit more accessible for people to get in and complete. So again, David really hit on the main points. But that would be the only other thing I would really add there, is just to look at the kind of get into the weeds of the details and see if there's more flexibility there.
Great point. I think everyone on the call would agree. We could, there's a lot of work to be done on ease of access. I'm going to start bringing in some of the questions in the sidebar, and if you want to come in, make a comment, ask a question, please put your hand up too. I want to start. Jessica's asked a great question about the benefits or changes that made Iowa want to switch to an SAA state. So Dane, you're the most recent state to go through this process of becoming an SAA state. Can you tell us a bit about what that looked like, why you made the switch?
Yes. Let me get prepared here. So, like I said before, my introduction there, it was the conversation really started about 5 years ago. And again, I think it was more of, we were as a state looking at how can we really help our employers. The employers were really reaching out and calling, hey, we need more people, we need more skilled workers. And that's when I think the idea was well, first of all, found out about SAA. And I think, David, help me here, Alabama was the first state to transition to SA in over 30 years, or 25 years. So we saw that, and this was before me as director, but we saw that Alabama had just transitioned, and then Colorado was also looking to transition to SAA. So then that got the gear starting and the conversations. One thing led to another, and again, here we are. David did say, he did allude to the fact that this is not just oh, you guys we're going to do this, and then the next day it happens. This was probably at least a 2 to 3 year process, the approval, because again, you have to get the buy-in, you have to have, get your legislature to we want to codify your office, you want to codify your registered apprenticeship standards and everything that you're going to be, which also is a requirement from the Department of Labor for them to be comfortable in understanding, like, okay, if we approve this state has the resources and the logistics and the capability to do all of these things. So that literally took years to iron out. And then we did get approved, again, June of last year. And the one thing I always say is, we knew it was going to be a lot, but on June 26th, we were just IWD working here. On June 27th, we were a state apprenticeship agency. And once that switch flipped, we were in charge of it all. And that is a pretty intense feeling, knowing like yesterday, we really didn't have any jurisdiction or any control. And now we oversee all of it. And so that not that we weren't working and weren't getting ready for that, but just the reality of that was a very big shift. So it took us, months really to identify how do we want to approach this? What are we going to do as far as program development? What trainings do we need to do? Getting our team in place, all of those things. So I would say, I mean, and again, I can talk about this all day, but I don't want to discourage it, but I just want people to prepare for the amount of work and effort it goes into. But I will absolutely 100% say it was the right decision. And I think we are, as a state, are better for it because again, now our team is able to work with every employer's, one-on-one. We're able to get out there. Our Iowa Workforce Development State Agency, again, we're embedded in here. So we have all of these support offices and staff throughout the state to help the training and the education. And so we're looking at even different pathways. Work-based learning is a huge push here in Iowa. We're working very closely with our Department of Education because quality pre-apprenticeship for Iowa is part of work-based learning. That is a work-based learning bucket. So we have staff on our team that work specifically with high schools to create work-based learning opportunities, whether that's quality pre-apprenticeship or registered apprenticeship. We're actually looking at youth apprenticeship too and wanting to really model a lot of that from what David in Wisconsin does because it's a tried and true approach that they've been able to do for the last 30 years with youth apprenticeship. So again, we're very new. I mean, again, it's in the infancy of all this, but we're really able to see and hopefully preparing ourselves to springboard into a lot of things that weren't able to be done. Now we're able to do those things because we are a state apprenticeship agency.
Thanks, Tone. So big transition, a lot of work getting set up, but now you're setting yourself up to do things that you couldn't do before, working across state agencies, more integration with education, things like that. David, can I ask you, with your NASTAD hat on, what do you see across your SAA states? What can you do differently as an SAA state?
So one of the things that we're doing is creating more connectivity for those on the call or for those on the call that were able to attend our conference. The theme of the conference was the Wisconsin Apprenticeship Advantage, right? So that's inclusive of all of the programs that are under our purview, not only registered apprenticeship, but using youth and certified pre-apprenticeship as pathways, the work that we do in our DLC, the partnerships that we have with our technical college system, the partnership that we have with our 11 workforce boards all around the state that we're able to execute on the ground, very specific to our state and very specific to our industries. The partnerships that we're developing now with Iowa as an adjacent SAA and Minnesota as an adjacent SAA to create reciprocity agreements between our three states. That's all work that we're able to do on the ground level because of our state's region. A lot of the work that we execute is very, very similar, whereas trying to do that across the entire nation to relate a specific industry from a state that's thousands of miles away from us can become problematic with the execution. So we're able to do those things. The other thing, and I'll speak specific to NASTAD, we've been working to create even more connectivity between our states. We hold office hours monthly, and that's where we take a deep dive into specific topics that affect our respective states, or we have a free-for-all where, hey, anything that you're going through, bounce it off of everyone and we'll get that answer. So NASTAD is working as more of a cohort, and that has enabled us to duplicate best practices from all around the country. Different policy we're able to look at, different administrative rule we're able to share out and execute those best practices, which has enabled us to grow apprenticeship more widely. So, what we're able to execute on the ground specific to Wisconsin and on all of our NASDAQ states are able to execute now in moving as a cohort has been amazing. And with regard to our NASDAQ states, I see nothing but growth. I think Harry, when um, when your leadership had come to the Wisconsin conference, one of the data points that he shared was when when a state becomes an SAA, the data shows that there's immediate increase in participation in registered apprenticeship. That's what the data shows. So that says what that tells me is the nuanced approach that Dane is able to take, the nuanced approach that Shalandri is able to take in Tennessee, in all of our newer states, helps to helps to grow registered apprenticeship with the boots on the ground approach that they're able to take and the nuance that they're able to effectuate in their respective state.
Thanks, David. I've just add one point from AFA's perspective, which is about state funding. So, you don't have to have an SAA to put state dollars into apprenticeship, but it helps. The states with SAAs tend to be putting in more state dollars because they've got a voice within the administration advocating for apprenticeship, so they have more kind of direct influence and impact on state budgets. I'm going to pick up some of the other questions in the sidebar. So there's a great question about public sector apprenticeships, what the outlook for public sector apprenticeships is. And we know this has been a focus in some states. California's had a big push on it. So has Maryland. There's a focus in the last administration. The previous executive were on apprenticeships. So yeah, can you tell us a bit about what's happening with public sector apprenticeships and what the opportunities are in your states? And Shari, you guys do a lot of work on this, so please come in if you've got anything to add. David, can I start with you?
So in our state, like, being the longest tenured SA in the country, like, we're set up pretty well. I have 40 staff, 40 statewide staff in Wisconsin, and only a couple are grant funded. So when we start to beg that question, like, we have to specifically understand those differences in our newer states, even those middle ground states that are less tenured than a state like mine. So that's where we need that cornerstone of investment. So then those respective state legislatures can prove out, and we can come back to them and say, hey, this what we've been able to do in Wisconsin, especially with our grant funding, is say, hey, we grant funded this AOR and we had a return of this many apprentices. Can we now move this person off of a grant that's expiring because this model works and it's able to be a proving model for our state to then pick up that GPR funding and make that individual a permanent and not grant funding. So when we start to talk about those specific strategies, we need those grant funds to then prove out a model so that our state level administrations can then adopt funding. The other strategic model is supportive services for registered apprentices that we rolled out, and that was specific funding directly to apprentices to help pay for uniforms, equipment, tuition, childcare, car repairs, all of those things that not only gets an apprentice in the door, but helps them proceed toward completion. All data shows once a registered apprentice hits that year to year and a half mark, the cancellation rates go down dramatically. And those supportive services fund help to push that out. We did OJL funding to new apprenticeship sponsors. That was part of our grant funding that helped to push our numbers up, because now when my AORs are trying to sell apprenticeship to a new sponsor, we can also say, hey, if you sign on and your apprentice meets that 90-day mark, we'll give you a reimbursement of this much. So right now, it will help you if you buy into the apprenticeship model and sign an apprentice on right away. So all of these things work as levers, but one can help prove out the model of the other, so your state legislature can then invest more into the program because now you have a proven strategy.
Thanks, David. Todd, can I bring you in on public sector apprenticeships? Your
Sure,
experience.
thank you. I want to quickly state that the majority of SAAs and OAs, for that matter, have in the public sector for teachers do have teacher registered apprenticeship programs. So that's one public sector aspect. The state of Connecticut, specifically, of which I'm the state apprenticeship director of, we have the majority of our municipalities and our state workforce is unionized. I have agreements between labor and management, or the various unions, and the state or the municipality, for that matter, on various apprenticeship programs. The first one I did was the State Department of Transportation. Throughout the country, everybody has noticed that the cost of government is constantly in the headlines and needs to be reduced by the general public. That's the outcry all the time. Being said, it means less people. We looked at a registered apprenticeship for the state of Connecticut's employees as a continuous improvement exercise and a recruiting exercise. But definitely because there's less people that need to do more, we were able to incorporate registered apprenticeship and all the tasks of the on-the-job training as a continuous exercise of a new employee. So looking at that lens, it gave basically we were able to sell it, so to speak, to the state for its own benefit. So that was an advantage. We're looking at the municipalities because there's a huge need for building inspectors in various aspects of all of the different health out in the departments of public health, sanitarians. And they need to be experienced in grocery stores and restaurants, so on and so forth. So by incorporating registered apprenticeship as an onboarding proficiency task list has actually added value to why municipalities and states have utilized that. So thank you for letting me speak.
Thanks, Todd. That's a great point. There's an economic imperative for the public sector here. It's a great argument. Shari, did you want to add anything from your experience here?
Sure. I would just say AFA was really the impetus for us to get interested in public sector, because you all kind of gave us that challenge and said, hey, what can we do in public sector? We as an intermediary, we're a national intermediary, and so we kind of followed what was going on. And then when we saw a state that just, had some funding into it, we were able to really, it's taken us about 2 years we built relationships. It's not an easy one. You really have to dig in. It is very much on the ground, and it depends upon what the state and what the funding is focused on. And this has a focus on school to work. And so it's getting into the local high schools, and very much, David, what you said about using this as this is a proof of concept. So if we can do it within this one high school district and help with the youth that are moving and getting them now ready to launch into public sector, and then focused on one area of public sector. And David, we're big in healthcare, so we chose that. But we're also looking at like wastewater. And then when you look at things like that get into more of that area, how can the administration's AI component and cybersecurity, because you think of, you do not want something happening that goes astray with the cyber in those plants. And so there's so much that can happen in the public sector. And then there's also public safety. And then that's another area that we're looking at, which is up under public sector. But that has a nuance when you do school to work, because you can't have somebody who is 18 be a police officer. They have to wait till they're 21 to get into the police academy. So what do we do with them between that period of time so we don't lose them, right? And so it's just really working grassroots with that local level, but within what the state is telling us what their desire is, and then trying to build that. We as intermediary are just bringing the parties together and helping, and then of course we'll work with our state ATR to make sure that we're writing the apprenticeship in the correct way. But that's where we focused on it. Thanks, Harry.
Thanks, Sherry. And I really agree with your proof of concept point. I mean, you and Todd mentioned like a whole host of different occupations there, and we kind of forget sometimes that the public sector covers almost every occupation, so it can serve as a great proof of concept in apprenticeship. But it's not easy. You're dealing with a whole different set of hiring rules and regulations. I'm going to try and pick up one or two last questions. So there's been a raging debate in the start about OA and SAA states, and especially on collaboration and ideas like reciprocity. So if we're what we're hearing is we're going to move to a more state-based system. The administration see more states becoming SAAs rather than the kind of bifurcated approach we have now. In this world, what are the areas where we need common agreement, collaboration between SAAs, maybe kind of like minimum guidelines or shared approaches? David, have you thought about this from a NASTAD perspective?
I tapped in chat. So when it comes to standards, and Wisconsin is a state that does state standards, we may take a bit of bare bones template from standards that may be in OA, but then we work to Wisconsinize them and create state standards. Whereas a OA state that uses those OA standards, it becomes a bit immovable. So, for instance, I can go across state lines and talk to Iowa and say, hey, Dane, we're going to create painting standards, painting apprentice standards. And why don't we work together to create those minimum standards for state purposes so that they're in line, and each one of our stakeholders can go above and beyond the state standards that we work together to procure, but you and I will work together to create those minimums based on our stakeholders in our individual state. And because we can do that as an SAA to create state standards for state usage, that becomes a lot easier for us to have that conversation. Whereas when we talk to the OA states, them using OA standards become a bit immovable. Like they don't have the ability to go above and beyond what those minimum standards are. So that's why it becomes easier. The other thing that I always want to speak to, and this hits home because I'm a plumber, went through a plumbing apprenticeship, and for us states that plumbing is the example, for us states that are on borders of large bodies of fresh water, plumbing training looks dramatically different than it does in our NASTAD state in Arizona, because their training may be specifically pointed toward water conservation. Even when we talk about tech apprenticeships, do we create those tech apprenticeships along the lines of Silicon Valley in California? Or is it along the lines in the IT execution in us Midwestern states between Dane, Aaron, and myself? So, like, what does that look like as execution on the ground? Because if Silicon Valley creates the national standard for IT apprenticeships, then it may be something that we can't even execute in Iowa or Wisconsin. So we have to go we have to look at this with nuance. That's why we have SAAs, to be able to attack the specific operational needs of specific industries and how they execute in our state. Now, as we move forward, there's going to be a wonderful, wonderful project that NASTAD is going to be a part of with Paisley, but that's going to take that more nuanced approach to the execution of how we look at standards regionally and how we look at them nationally, and where we can find that nuance and that synergy between the two.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. So, there is lots of variation. There are lots of reasons why you need to do things on a state level, but there's also opportunities to collaborate either nationally or regionally. Think about state compacts in regions. We've got Josh's work bringing us together, looking at interoperability. So a lot going on in that space. I'm afraid we've hit time, so I'm going to close us out. And sorry for the questions we haven't picked up. Dane and David, thank you so much for your thoughts and your leadership in the space. I'm sure we'll be hearing more from you as this develops. I just want to quickly say something about our next steps. So we're taking all the discussions we've had over the last 6-7 weeks, putting together a document based on that feedback with a set of recommendations about how we reach this 1 million apprenticeships for DOL, but also for Congress. We're aiming to submit this in early July, so we're going to hold a session for AFA members on the 26th of June to run through those recommendations. So please sign up and come to that. Otherwise, thanks so much for your participation in these sessions. We covered a lot of ground, and there's still a lot to talk about and hash on. So yeah, thank you for coming. We'll hang around for 10 minutes after this call in case there's anything else people want to pick up. But thanks for your time.